again at the 2013 World Angus Forum at Rotorua, and with me now is Dorian Garrick. Dorian is a professor in animal science in the US.
That's right, yep.
So whereabouts are you based there, Dorian?
I'm in Ames, Iowa at Iowa State University. I hold an endowed chair in animal breeding and genetics.
Can you explain that, an endowed
Endowed
chair?
chair, yeah, sure. An endowed chair is one where people have made donations to the university, and the donations create a capital fund which is used to fund special positions. My chair is named after Professor Lush, and Professor Lush was really the first animal breeder in the world. Animal breeding is all about using genetics to improve populations.
Yes.
And if we turn the clock back 100 years ago, there was a debate about what caused the relationship between parents and offspring. Some people thought that there were large Mendelian factors that explained differences in performance. Other people thought that there were statistical explanations, and they developed methods like regression to relate the height of humans to their sons.
Oh, yeah.
And Dr. Lush was one of them who along with others, recognised that, in fact, these were different versions of the same theory. He wrote the first book on animal breeding, explaining to farmers how to do selection and improve populations.
Yeah. So not all in the lab though over there. You're not always in the lab. You'll be all over the show and all over the world, are you?
I do a lot of work, yeah, with breed associations and other organisations, and give a lot of talks. I have a team of postdoctoral students and graduate students that are doing day-to-day data analysis. I work probably more than half of my time on theoretical aspects of how we should do the prediction, and then the various team members that I work with try applying those methods in various species. I directly supervise people working in the beef cattle area, but through my colleagues we also work on broiler hens, on layer hens, and on pigs, and on maize improvement and human prediction of health issues and so on.
Yeah. So what was the main emphasis on your speech today?
It was to give an overview of genomics. So genomics is a recent technology, and genomics provides an opportunity to use information about DNA sequence to predict performance, just in the same way that the human field is interested in personalised medicine.
Yeah.
So if you go to the chemist and buy some aspirin, it says take 2, regardless of whether you're a little guy or whether you're a big guy. And in fact, it turns out that the genes that break down compounds like aspirin have different variants.
Yeah.
And so in reality, everybody should have a different sort of a dose. What's sufficient for one person may be way more than another needs.
Yeah.
So we're just trying to apply the same kinds of thinking to ranking animals. So we have some bulls that produce offspring that grow faster than others, so they must have genes which are responsible for that increased growth.
Yep.
So if we can identify where those genes are, we can predict from a DNA test whether an animal is going to be a faster grower or a slower grower animal, without having to do what we did in the past, which was to put an air tag in and physically weigh it.
Yeah.
And the trouble with physical performance recording is that, for one thing, it's expensive. You have to collect all of these measurements. But secondly, you have to delay selection while you wait to find out who are the good individuals. So it'd be much better if on a young calf you could determine the calves that are likely to be below average and not have to invest the same time or money in determining their actual performance.
So the tools to the farmers there, the 50k, and then there was the 700 that you talked about there before.
So yeah, those are just different chips, as they're called.
Yeah.
And the 50k interrogates 50,000 different positions in the genome. So cattle have 30 pairs of chromosomes, and so the 50k has something like 2,000 markers or genotypes on each chromosome.
Yeah.
And there are other chips like 700k that are denser, and there are other chips that are sparser.
Yeah.
So there are a range of options around, but the concept of use for any of them is the same.
Yeah.
It's to try and determine whether an individual inherited the above average forms from its parents or the below average forms for its parents. In work we've done in chickens, which because of their short generation interval, we've been doing this now for 6 generations in chickens.
Just to speed up your testing, that you use the chickens.
Yes, and we have a work with a commercial chicken company that is interested in improvement, and we had some ideas on how they might implement it, with some of my colleagues in particular, Jack Deckers. So they took one of their elite lines and they generated enough offspring to create 2 copies of it.
Yeah.
And 1 copy they selected in a conventional way, and the other copy they allowed us to use genomic selection. So we've been through 6 generations of that selection where we've actually been able to compare them. Well, in cattle, the generation interval is about 5 years, so that would be like a 30-year experiment in cattle.
You haven't got time.
So we've learned a lot about how this technology works by applying it to chickens, and there's no doubt that you can get more accurate rankings of young animals using genomic information than you can using conventional information,
Yeah.
provided you have done the research and discovery analyses in the same population that you're trying to use for prediction.
Yeah.
There are some technical problems with it, and one of the technical problems is that you probably don't just want to know that this is the fastest growing animal. You want to know how much faster it grows than some other animal.
Yeah.
And putting an absolute value on it is a little bit more difficult than giving the ranking. So we know the rankings are better, but precisely saying how many units better this bull is that's been progeny tested, this bull that's been genomically predicted compared to a conventional progeny tested bull that's maybe 5 or 6 years older, that comparison is a little bit more difficult.
Yeah.
And so that's an active area of research.
Yeah. Is everyone quite excited about it?
Well, new technologies are one of those things. If you adopt them too early, before enough is known about them, then you may end up not getting a good return on investment.
Yeah.
If you wait too long, then you run the risk that you've missed out on the opportunities, and there's a sweet spot for somebody to come in and invest in this technology.
Yeah.
So I think around the marketplace there are potential customers that would have fallen into all 3 of those positions. There are some that probably got in too early when the chip testing was 3 or 4 times more expensive than it is today.
Yeah.
There are other people that are coming in now, which is probably a good time to come in, and then there are others who just don't see a role for this methodology in their business.
Yeah.
And the trouble is, if you don't put your toe in the water, you don't know what you're missing out on. You don't know how to fine tune it to make it better.
Yeah.
But it's definitely revolutionised some of the other plant breeding operations, and it's now widely used in chickens and pigs, and dairy cattle is probably the best livestock example, because to progeny test a bull for milk production you had to wait for his daughters to grow up, and that was very expensive. So a genomic test that can be done on a young bull calf is much more
just a massive shortcut.
Effective. Exactly. Whereas in beef cattle, by the time an animal is old enough to be used as a sire, you can ultrasound scan it, you can measure his own growth. So although it does provide opportunity to improve the accuracy, you are spending a little bit of money to do that. So breeders have been a little bit less reluctant to invest to the levels that they invested in the dairy industry.
So how does the genotyping fit in with the performance recording?
Well, basically the objective of any improvement program is obviously to improve the population. And the way you improve a population is you choose among the selection candidates the ones that are better than average to use as parents.
Yeah.
And there are many different ways you can identify the individuals that are better than average. One way is by performance recording. by measuring the individuals themselves and saying this animal is heavier or this animal is lighter.
Yep.
So that should tell me something about their genetic differences.
Yep.
And we use a term called heritability to tell us how strong that association between what you observe is and what their real genotypes are.
Yep.
So if the heritability is high, then you can get good response just by choosing the individuals that perform very well. But sometimes the heritability is low. Sometimes you can't measure the individual. For instance, you can't measure a bull for milk production. So in that case, you need pedigree and performance recording, where you do the measurement on relatives of the individual that you're wanting to do selection on.
Yeah.
So you measure some daughters of a bull, not because you're particularly interested in the daughters, but you want to find out if the father is average or above average or below average.
Yeah.
So the problem with all of that is the time and money that it costs to identify who's better than average and who's worse than average.
Yeah.
And since we know that their genes are inherited as DNA, and we know that we can collect genotypes to determine which particular piece of DNA from a sire was passed on to a particular offspring, we can identify the particular regions of the genome where the genes are that are responsible for differences in performance. And once we know where those genes are, we can then select a young animal based on whether it has the favourable form of that gene or the unfavourable form of that gene,
Yeah.
without having to wait to do the genotyping, to do the phenotyping.
Yeah. Yeah.
So genomics is just another way to determine the genetic merit of an individual. It complements pedigree and performance recording. It does require some investment in paying for a genotype,
Yeah.
but it has the potential to be more accurate. And like any technology that saves labour or saves time, you have to make decisions about whether you see a business opportunity for this or not.